You wrote a beautiful piece about your dad.
Yeah, special man.
And your website is theoldschoolpatriot.com. Great website to go to. Urge people to go read that. Read just always great articles. Love reading about your dad. And I know your family has a history of service for our country. I mean, many in your family have served America in the military. So thank you for all of that.
Pleasure.
Love that. Okay. Well, on Memorial Day, people try to wax eloquent about, their honoring our soldiers, and they do, and we all do. We do various things to go honor them. I saw this meme that was kind of surfacing, being spread around on Memorial Day, that was saying that on Memorial Day you shouldn't honor people like Robert E. Lee or the Confederate soldiers because they were wrong and they were bad. And I kind of weighed in and said, you know what? At that time they were doing what they thought was right, and they weren't. And so just these people, they fought, they died for what we now all call America. And I don't know. I just whether you have conflicts you thought we were wrong, and many people thought we shouldn't be in Vietnam or we should have come home sooner, whatever they thought about it. Honoring anyone who fought and gave their lives, it just seems the most basic sense of gratitude we should have. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, that's how Memorial Day came to be. Was the blacks, freed blacks down 1865 in Charleston. They held a ceremony for Union prisoners that had been captured down there who had died during the captivity. So it is about honoring the people that have gone on before us, no matter what their principles and values really were. I mean, when you think about the guys that fought for the South, it wasn't so much about slavery for a lot of them. It was that they felt that their rights were being infringed upon by the government in Washington, D.C. But the key thing is that when all was said and done, we still had an America. We came together. Yeah. Now, let's always remember, it was the Democrat Party that started the Ku Klux Klan because they weren't happy about it. That's just the nature of who that party is.
Yep.
But we had an America that came together and said, okay, how can we focus and how can we self-correct? That's the great thing about this country. It understood that it had a problem. It could not live up to the words of the Declaration of Independence as long as it had this thing called slavery. And Abraham Lincoln set forth so that we can truly be the ideal that we're supposed to be. And some 600,000 lost their lives to fight for that ideal. And so I think it is important that we honor those dead. And remember that Arlington National Cemetery was Robert E. Lee's property. And
yeah, it was.
And so it was taken away from him to make that national cemetery that we have today. So maybe people should study our history a little bit more.
Well, speaking of studying history, I want to turn to something that presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg is saying. I will get to him in a moment, but on the subject of America self-correcting, I love that point, and I make that in a different contexts all the time. We had slavery when America was founded. A lot of the founders knew it wasn't right, but they couldn't get the country created without. They went forward. We also didn't have the right for women to vote.
Yes.
And that was another self-correcting, and we continue to self-correct in this country.
It's a more perfect union.
Yes.
That's what it says in our Constitution. We're working toward a more perfect union.
Yeah. And so I love that concept of the ideas in our founding documents are what guide us in that self-correction. The Declaration, which I love, and the Constitution guiding us. And so we're not saying we're perfect, but we have the best principles imaginable in which to found a nation. So we self-correct. Okay, now I want to hit Pete Buttigieg. So I have not piled on him yet in the show at all, but he is running, as you well know, for the presidency, and as one of the 23, I think it is, Democrats.
23, 24 now, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Running for president, and he had an interview on Dennis Prager's show, I think it was, or Hugh Hewitt, one of them. He had an interview anyway. And he was asked about, I guess there was Republicans tend to have a Reagan and Lincoln Day dinner. That's we have annual things, and Democrats have dinners, and they had
Jackson, Jefferson, yeah.
Yeah. And so there was some local Democrat group that had said basically they didn't want to keep Jefferson's name in their dinner anymore because, as history has uncovered, he actually owned slaves and apparently had children with
Sally Hemings.
Yeah, that's right. And so they're basically saying, and so Buttigieg was a little bit more cautious. Some of the people on the right kind of pounced on him too hard, and they made it sound like he had said, let's tear down the Jefferson Memorial. He didn't say that, but he did agree that Jefferson's name, we should question whether his name should be, he agreed to remove it from the name of the dinner, and he was saying we should question other contexts. So, I want to ask what you think about all that.
Well, I think it's silly. I mean, if we are looking back at that time period and thinking that they should have the same 21st century values, back then in the 17th, 18th century, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I would say that the man that sat down and wrote that incredible document called the Declaration of Independence, a man that was a two-term president of the United States of America that founded the University of Virginia, one of the most highly intellectual presidents that we have ever had.
Eloquent.
Why would you want to remove his name? So stop going back and looking at people from a perspective here in the 21st century and casting your values on them then. Okay, no, slavery was not a good thing, but it was an accepted thing at that point in time. Now,
all over the world, by the way,
all
not just
over
here.
the world.
Yeah.
And so, they also need to understand that when you read John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, it was life, liberty, and property.
Yeah.
And the reason why it was changed to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was because Franklin told Jefferson, do not want people to believe that they have an inalienable right to own another person. And that's why it's not life, liberty, and property. So that's how brilliant these men were at that time. They understood this issue. Could they fix it right then when they're just 13 little colonies trying to be 13 states to take on the greatest power the world knew at that time? No, they did not want to have a circular firing squad. But they understood when they wrote the Constitution, they're working toward a more perfect union.
I love that point. I did not know that was an interaction between Franklin and Jefferson.
Absolutely, because
Franklin
was the guy that was tasked to supervise Jefferson writing.
Young Jefferson.
Young Jefferson writing the Declaration. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing because a battle is ongoing in America about taking down statues. Anyone who did something in the past that wasn't right. In fact, I was remembering, I don't know if you remember this, but in Dallas, where we happen to be, we're in Dallas, but there was a discussion about removing a Robert E. Lee statue. It had been there for a long time.
And it's gone.
It's gone. Do you remember the day before, you and I were at a meeting with about 12 or 15 people, kind of discussed what do we do about this. They're trying to take down this Robert E. Lee statue. And after the meeting, we walked down, you and I did, took pictures of ourselves in front of the statue.
I still have it.
I do too. And it was the very next day, the statue was taken down. The very next day.
And that revisionist history is very disconcerting for me because history is not there for you to like or dislike, to remove or keep. History is there for you to learn from. And so when I look at all of these statues being torn down or what have you, what's the difference between that and what the Taliban did in Bamiyan province with the Buddhist the Buddhist statues? What's the difference between that and what ISIS did all across northern Iraq and into Syria, destroying ancient artifacts and things of this nature? So again, this tyrannical viewpoint in that, I will only accept the history that I want to accept. Just the same as to the left, we don't have freedom of speech anymore. We have freedom of their definition of accepted speech. We don't have freedom of religion. We have freedom of worship, and they're telling us where you can have that worship.
Right.
You don't have the freedom to assemble. You don't, how many conservative speakers did we have this past commencement season on college campuses and universities?
Very few.
It's appalling.
Yep.
It's appalling.
On the subject of who it is that tries to push things down, on our website, AmericaCanWeTalk.org, just tell them, on AmericaCanWeTalk.org, you need to go on the homepage under shows, go down to list of links, and one of the articles was really great, a thoughtful article called Why Socialists Want to Destroy Our Memory of the Past. And it was a great concept the guy was talking about, saying essentially, when you want people to agree the government is the power, we tell you what rights you have, what you don't have, then they need to remove the symbols in your society that might remind you of your history, of your heritage, of who in your past stood up for your country, defined your country. They want to say, no, socialists want to say, and as control freaks want to say, we tell you. It was an eloquently argued point.
Well, very simple. If you rid the past, then you can shape the present and you can define the future. And that's exactly what is happening when no one can go back and understand why we have Memorial Day, or no one is being taken out to the Civil War battlefields or the Revolutionary War battlefields. When people don't understand why Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner as the British were bombarding Fort McHenry, then all of a sudden, America's bad. If you don't teach America until the industrial age, you talk about all of these things that were just horrible for the workers, and that's why we need to have workers uniting. And then you take it into the future and you start talking about wealth redistribution and all of these things that are antithetical, because people don't understand individual sovereignty. They don't understand liberty. They don't understand freedoms. They don't understand natural rights, not these ideological rights that the left comes up with. And so that's why they have to erase the incredible past of the United States of America. 244 years.
So what do you say? What is your answer to the activist leftist who says, why would America honor Robert E. Lee? He stood up for slavery. I mean, I know you answered it in a way. But
Robert E. Lee did not stand up for slavery. Robert E. Lee was fighting because he believed that his country, his state, Virginia, was being invaded. Robert E. Lee was right here in Texas. Robert E. Lee was an engineering officer. Robert E. Lee served in the Mexican War. So, I mean, Robert E. Lee was an American war hero, a graduate of West Point.
Yeah.
But Robert E. Lee decided that he wanted to defend his country. He termed that as Virginia.
One last thing that I think will make a great point on this topic for people, because I do think this destruction of history, the people who want to take down, and now it's gone on to Christopher Columbus, not just Robert E. Lee, but the thinkers at the higher level understand why they're trying to engender this hatred of America's past. But some of the people arguing for it on the ground, they're just, they really think they're standing up for something noble. They think they're saying, well, I'm trying to help America be better, so we don't honor these bad guys of the past. But now, just this week, this information, I guess, from the FBI has been released about Martin Luther King, who was a extraordinary, towering figure in American history, and who apparently was engaged in serial infidelity and accused of being around when bad things were happening. Let's leave it at that. He wasn't. So he had a personal history that wasn't perfect. But the people, I think, who would say Robert E. Lee should come down, Christopher Columbus, I don't know. When they get to Martin Luther King, I just think there's a profound need to recognize the whole of what someone's contribution is to America, and then to say we're not celebrating this part, but we are celebrating what he brought.
But furthermore, we're not worshiping men or women. We are, indebted to them for the things that they stood for. And let us always remember there was Lyndon Baines Johnson, Democrat president, that told Herbert Hoover and the FBI to conduct surveillance against Martin Luther King Jr.
Which is why we know all this, yes.
That's why we know all this. And so, kind of funny, we still have the same party conducting surveillance against innocent American people. So,
good point.
well, I told you, that's why you have me around.
It is.
No, but that's the key thing. It was a quote attributed to George Santayana back in 1928. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
That's why we study history. That's why we go back and we read, not to memorize dates, but to understand the mindset, understand why people did what they did at that point in time so that we can grow from it. But the other side doesn't want to grow from it. They just want ideological domination.
I love that, and it ties back to the socialist mindset you were talking about at the very start, your piece you wrote last week that was talking about they just really want control. They want control over every aspect of life.